some time after the meeting started.
Did you run out of cassettes on the last meeting? Because that was a long one.
It was a long time to download it, that's for sure. Okay, I think we're ready, Mr. Chair, whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's call it to order, and please do a roll call.
Miss Bright,
Present.
Miss Dickinson, she let me know she wasn't gonna be able to be here today. Miss Clement,
Present.
Mr. Kapler,
Present.
and Mr. Stevie, he told me he was gonna be on standby. He cannot make it, but if needed for quorum, he might be able to join us for the first few minutes. But we do have a quorum now, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is approval of last meeting, the last LAR report. We would need a motion and a second and a vote to approve the meeting minutes that were recorded.
Mr. Chairman, this is Carol Clement. I move we approve the minutes from Friday, October 22nd, 2021.
Great. There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. All right, the next item is, I believe, call to the audience. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Is there any audience that would like to speak for maybe a 1 minute or so and introduce themselves?
And as you introduce yourselves, if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Yes. And it appears there is no audience.
Yeah, I'm Steve Dolan. I'm Steve Dolan. Can I speak, please?
Oh, yes, Steve. Sorry. You may. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Just state your full name and your address for our record.
Yes, I'm Steve Dolan at 4154 North Toledo Road in the Tucson Mountains, where I've lived for 30 years, and residents are concerned about the TEP variance request impacts to the Silver Bell Road scenic route. The October 22nd DRB meeting was long, of 2.5 hours. It included presentations and discussions, resulting in more questions than answers. More county than city residents drive Silver Bell Road from Goree to El Camino del Cerro. We were prepared to oppose the TEP variance request to the Board of Adjustment on October 27th, but the public hearing was canceled due to a lack of a quorum. We were surprised by the Board of Adjustment automatic continuance to TEP and today's DRB meeting. I will explain why to recommend denial to the Board of Adjustment. On October 22nd, all DRB members had many questions to TEP about not all possible options explored, landscaping, pole heights, and lighting impacts to the scenic corridor and the dark skies. Deny the variance request so TEP will design underground utilities in the right-of-way as required by UDC Section 5.3.9A and explore all options such as using the existing transmission utility corridor 1/10 of a mile east and out of the scenic corridor. Denial also stops DRB and our public concerns about power pole heights, landscape mitigation, and lighting conflicts. TEP is proposing taller poles for more electricity as a transmission, not scenic corridor. Denial of the TEP variance request will also improve the scenic quality along the Silver Bell Road widening project. Design Review Board, please recommend to the Board of Adjustment denial, finding the project not in compliance with the variance criteria in UDC Section 3.10.3.K. Criteria 2, the circumstances were self-imposed because TEP created the existing large power poles to increase transmission voltage, knowing about archaeological findings along Silver Bell Road, and the restraints or challenges met by other underground utilities in the project area. 3, the variance would grant a special privilege to a private utility company in public right-of-way. TEP is not a property owner, and other properties must comply with UDC Section 5.3 Scenic Corridor Zone. Last, the TEP request is not the minimum request that will afford relief as a lease modification of the UDC provisions. Many DRB members question why TEP has not explored all options, such as underground utility in the 3 to 10 feet fill for the Silver Bell Road widening project that would meet the UDC. Last, the October 22nd DRB meeting included an excellent archaeology presentation with a table that variance denial would be only 5 acres of utility disturbance because this is a fill, not an excavation project. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for your remarks.
Beautiful.
There's another hand up from the public. Denise, if I got that right, could you please introduce yourself, say your name and address, and keep it to 1 or 2 minutes?
Thank you. I have actually some slides to show. And is there a way that I can share my screen with you?
Yes, Ms. Baldwin, can you please state your name and address for the record?
Thank you. My name is Denise Baldwin. My address is 1101 North Calle Gardenias, Tucson, Arizona, 85745. And I am the Vice President of Tucson Mountains Association. And did I get all that in that you needed?
Yes, thank you.
And I'm more familiar with Zoom than meetings, so if you could tell me what I need to do, I'd appreciate it.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, Ms. Baldwin, and there should be on the top menu like a rectangle, like a screen, and with a little arrow pointing up.
Okay. On the top? Sorry.
Maybe looks different on your window, but yeah, it should be that icon of
Okay.
a monitor screen with a
there we
arrow.
go. Okay, thank you. And there we go. Oh. Are you seeing it? No, I didn't click on it first.
No.
Okay, first things first. Okay, I need to share it first. So here, that, and did that do it?
They're using a different meeting
There you go.
Okay,
Yes.
application.
all right,
So
thank you. Here we go. We got it?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for guiding me. So first, I'd like to start by saying that this ordinance places us in time, at a time when human decisions cause great harm or solve problems. Fragmentation, habitat loss is happening for many reasons, and we're finding due to electric lines. We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction that is human caused, and these decisions are important. Since 1970, we've lost 3 billion, 29% of birds, 28% of vertebrates, and 35% of butterflies. Each year, power lines kill 57 million birds by collision, up to 11.6 million birds by electrocution. It's also about other animals. Electric line sparks cause fragmentation on par with roads. This increases habitat loss, loss of species, and loss of diversity. And I'd like to share with you what these sparks look like. This is taken from a video, and the citation is here. These are the sparks that animals can see, and they prevent animals from breeding or foraging along the electrical lines. So this is an important decision. So I want to make this real to all of us as we go forward, and we just say, oh, well, it's just a line, but it's not. This is a very important decision. So we have all of these things in place. We have the scenic routes, the ordinances, and enforcing the ordinances. Do we support where we've come from, or do we risk undermining the entire process altogether? What we have in the Silver Bell Scenic Corridor is the distribution that we're all here to talk about now, that we believe should be underground, and 2 transmission lines. I'm going to show you some pictures to make this all real, and I hope that you ask yourself, how do they look now? But you need to also imagine how they're going to look upgraded, because they're going to get taller if you decide that they warrant, if TEP warrants getting this variance, and it warrants getting bigger and taller and more wires, it's going to get worse. And how do they look in proximity to the transmission line?
Let me interrupt just a little bit, and I want to say thank you. Can you complete this in 2 minutes from now? I'll allow 2 more minutes, but we have kind of a long agenda.
Okay, that's fine.
So so it's 7:47. We would expect it to just wrap up because we got business to take care of. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sure you guys have taken a field trip to look at the actual site, so that you've seen what this looks like. So maybe this is repetitive and this is already real to you, but in case it's not, I would like for you to see this. So this is how close these lines are to this neighborhood. They are right on the parameter. This is just 4 rows of homes. The yellow lines are the TEP lines. This neighborhood is sandwiched with these electric lines. And right here, oh, by the way, this is only 500 feet difference. Right here, it's only 350 feet difference between the 2 TEP lines. The yellow lines are the TEP lines. The yellow line is the South Line project, and then right here is the Silver Bell line. This is going north on Silver Bell. The blue line is the widened road that gets moved 35 feet. This is at Columbus Park. And the difference here is 600 feet or 500 feet from the eastern edge of the road. And here you'll see that this is 550 feet or 450 feet from the edge of the road, from the transmission line, and then you'll see the road there. Here we have, this is the view shed of what it looks like from looking through to the Tucson mountains, through the Silver Bell, this just distribution line. It's going to get bigger and taller if we decide to give TEP this variance. This is the neighborhood. These poles and these monoliths here with the wires will get taller and will get more wires if you decide to give them this. This is looking down on this neighborhood, and the poles will cross from the west side to the east side, and these are the transmission lines. And this is what this neighborhood will get if this variance is granted. There's no hiding. There's no putting trees next to these poles to hide anything. This is what this neighborhood will get. This is this same neighborhood. This is these are the transmission lines to the left, to the east, and then those poles to the west will get closer to that neighborhood. This is what it looks like. This is the scenic corridor. It's not scenic with poles there. There's no hiding it. We cannot hide these poles. This is the transmission line. And we cannot accept any more false premises or false excuses from TEP. They want an absolute exemption. And Tucsonans want the ordinance enforced. Let's get TEP's design and plan to underground. Tucson deserves better. I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Are there any other members of the public that would like to talk? And I really do need to impose a 2-minute limit on it if there is anyone else. On my view, I'm not seeing anybody else raise their hand, or so I think we're done with the public comments. Could we, Maria, could you let me know how many cases are we going to review today, and in which order are we seeing the TEP case?
Mr. Chairman, members of the DRB, the first 2 cases are the 2 cases that remain pending from the last meeting. So it's the Wells Fargo solar carport and facade renovation for a proposed bar on Congress Street. And then the third item is TEP again, returning to the DRB.
Okay, that's the proper order. Then my next question for staff is, why are we seeing TEP again? Because we already discussed this case. What's our purpose in discussing it again?
Roslyn, would you like to kick in?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the DRB was unable to reach a recommendation for the last meeting, and you had a desire to continue it. Because the Board of Adjustment did not meet, there is an opportunity for them to return to you so that you could make a recommendation prior to the next Board of Adjustment hearing.
Okay. Are there any? Okay. So that's our third agenda item. So we'll keep that in mind when we get to that. Let's start with our first case. Maria, could you give us a report on the first case, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, this is a proposed rooftop solar carport at the Wells Fargo parking garage in downtown. The applicant is available here for review. I just need to let you know this: the parking garage is an eligible contributor to the downtown Tucson Historic National District. And so it had to go through review by the Tucson PIMA Historical Commission Plan Review Subcommittee. They reviewed it October 28th, and they recommended approval as presented by the applicant.
All right. Is the applicant present, and could they make their presentation to us?
Yes. Hi. My name is Jovanka Platuniak. I'm the project engineer from Amoresco that will be presenting.
So give me just one moment to share my screen.
Okay. So yeah, like Maria introduced the project, this is a solar canopy proposed at the Wells Fargo parking garage located at 35 East Alameda Street. The case number is DRB 2115. And joining me on the call from Amoresco today is Mark Hensel, who is the project manager. And I will turn it over to Mark to get started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for hearing us today. This project is part of Wells Fargo's nationwide sustainability goals, which include a significant on-site solar component. And this site is one of the sites selected to have solar energy implemented in order to offset some of the usage. So some of the specifications on this particular project, it's about a 5,000 square foot canopy on the top of a parking garage, producing about 90 kilowatts of electricity. That is enough to offset about 65% of the energy usage at that site. Then as far as some of the other design parameters, which Ivanka will speak more about, it is set back 35 feet from each edge of the garage to minimize any visual impacts. But Ivanka will speak more about the project details.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
All right, so backtracking a little bit to give some background on the site and parcel. So it is a parking garage at 35 East Alameda Street. The primary use of the structure is to provide parking to Wells Fargo employees and customers that utilize the bank branch at 150 North Stone across the alleyway here. It is in a existing office commercial residential zone, and for your reference, I do have the parcel number and activity numbers of the development package and building permit, which are both in active review right now. And all parking garage access points are off of Alameda Street. The ingress location is here on the west side, and the egress is here. And there's also an existing sidewalk on this side of Alameda Street as well. And I just want to point out the alleyway in between is for authorized personnel only. So there's no public access there. All right, so moving on to some of the documents that were included in the submittal. This is the site plan from the electrical plans. It is a 5,000 square foot canopy tilted 10 degrees to face west. It's comprised of 231 solar panels. We're planning to interconnect with the existing electrical system on the first floor of the parking garage. And you can see in the bottom left photo here, we would plan to occupy one parking space with the solar interconnection equipment because it did need to be within a certain distance of the existing equipment. The electrical conduit will not be visible from the outside from a street level. And the top right photo here, this is where the conduit is just planning to run up inside the existing columns. Then it will pop up right underneath the canopies, so nothing would be visible from the street. So these are the elevations that were included in this submittal as well. Now you can see better the 10-degree tilt facing west, and it is set back 35 feet from all edges of the garage to minimize street level visibility. As far as added height, it would be adding 8 feet of height on the low side, on the west side, and 11 feet on the east side. And we would have to remove the existing 3 light poles in the canopy location. And those light poles, for reference, are about 16 to 18 feet tall. So depending on how you look at it, we are kind of reducing height if you include the light poles in that. And I do have renderings of the street level views included a bit later that I will go over. So overall impacts of the project, like I mentioned earlier, we would only be occupying one space out of approximately 250 in the entire garage for the solar interconnection equipment, but all other spaces would remain open for public use. A shade study was asked for as part of the submittal, and Maria and I kind of went back and forth to address that, so I thought I would address it here as well. We will not be adding or removing any shade on public rights of way to a street level. We would only be shading the top of the canopy. It's set back too far from the edges for the shadow to actually extend that far. So yeah, we wouldn't be impacting any shade on the street level. I went over kind of how much height it would be adding to the building with the 8 feet and 11 feet added height to the existing structure. We would be bringing it up to 37 to 40 feet in total height. And for reference, the neighboring buildings range anywhere from 35 to 77 feet. So we think it's pretty in line with what's already there. We wouldn't be impacting the building facade. We're not adding or removing anything to the existing structure, just adding the canopy to the top floor. We would plan to paint the steel on the columns to match the existing building colors to make sure everything blends in. And as you can infer, we are not impacting any vehicular or pedestrian traffic patterns. So here are the renderings for the street level views. On the left side here, this is the view from the corner of Alameda Street and Stone. So here is the bank branch, 150 North Stone. The parking garage is back there. And if you can see right up here, this is the top corner of the canopy. So pretty much invisible from this corner. And if you move down Stone, you wouldn't be able to see the canopy at all. but we did want to point out where it would be visible there. And on the right side, this is the view facing west on Alameda Street, about 150 feet back from the garage. And this would be the most visible that the canopy would be from a street level. You'd just be able to see the top edge on the high side of that canopy. All right, so I wanted to go over examples of solar in the surrounding area as well. Right across the street from the parking garage that we're proposing solar at is parking garage serving the Pima County buildings at 220 North Stone. And as you can see in the aerials, there are two large monoplane solar canopies here. And Amoresco is actually the developer on this project as well. And we would be utilizing the same carport vendor and installer. So it gives a pretty good idea of structurally what our canopy would look like as well, just obviously smaller. It wouldn't be this big. And as you can see in this top left photo here, this is much more visible from a street level because there is really no offset at all from the edge of the garage here, but ours is just smack dab in the middle. All right, so my final slide is just summarizing the project as a whole. So yeah, about a 90 kW solar canopy to be installed on top of the Wells Fargo parking garage. It would be partially visible from certain vantage points at the street level, really just facing west on Alameda Street. We would be adding about 8 to 11 feet to the height of the existing structure. But the zoning, building use, building facade, and traffic patterns all remain unchanged. We are only occupying 1 out of 250 of the parking spaces, so very minor impact to total parking available. And I just went over the precedent example of solar right across the street at 220 North Stone. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation. I'd like to thank you again for allowing us to present today, and I'll open it up to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Design Review Board, what questions or comments do you guys have on that presentation?
Mr. Chairman, this is Carol Clement. To the applicant, my question is sorry, I don't know this, but is there why are you limiting the canopy to covering only 22 spaces? Why aren't you bringing it to the edge? Is there a code that calls for a setback from the edge? Probably not, because your precedent study shows it right to the edge. I think covering rooftop garages with solar panels is a great idea. So why aren't you making it larger?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. In this case, we're actually limited electrically, not physically, by the size. So the maximum size of that canopy was selected due to the existing electrical infrastructure in the garage.
Okay.
In order to make it larger, we would essentially have to replace every piece of electrical equipment in the garage as a whole. So that was the reason that design was selected, and then we just happened to place it in the middle as the most optimal and least visible location for it.
Thank you, and I commend you for every bit helps.
Thank you.
This is Rosemary Bright. I was just going to say, to me, it seems like a very straightforward design. I don't see anything objectionable about it.
Great, thank you. In this case, Maria, can you put the motion that we would, so that someone can make a motion? There it is.
Sure, I'll make a motion. The Design Review Board has reviewed the applicant's project for compliance with Rio Nuevo area design criteria and recommends to the Planning and Development Services Director approval, finding the project in compliance with the building design standards set forth in UDC sections 5.12.7.c1 through 15 and 5.12.7d. I don't think we have any conditions.
Great. I'll second that. I'll second that motion. And I'll now call for a vote. All those board members in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I think that was 2 ayes. Is there a third
I,
aye?
I also,
Great.
yes.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, everyone. So that motion has passed. Thank you, staff and applicant. Now we're on to the next case.
Thank you.
And I'll ask for the staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, this is a facade modification to accommodate for a new bar on an existing historic building. The proposed modifications are just for the north facade and also for the south facade of the building. So the applicant is available here as well for a presentation, and the structure is an eligible contributor to the Downtown Tucson Historic National Register. So it was reviewed by the PRS on October 14, and they recommended approval as presented by the applicant.
I'm Bill Mackey. I'm here to present the project. Let me share my screen. So this is, you all see the screen. Okay. So this is the project. It's at 128 East Congress. It's called the Gus Taylor Building. It was the sheet music portion of the old Chicago store. It was renovated a few years ago, and now it's being renovated again. North facade, which faces Congress Street, we will be working just below the second story windows only. And then on the back facade, again, it'll just be on the lower level of that. And so this is the general area, looking at the building from the various views. Here it is from 6th and Congress, 6th and Broadway, looking to the northwest. We're looking at the building from the northwest to the southeast of the facade. And then here's the corner of 6th and Scott. This doesn't matter to you guys. But here's the facade and the existing conditions. There's basically no historic fabric left below this second story windows, and we'll be tearing out all of it. There are some existing beams and columns that we'll be keeping, and in this lower picture right here, this is a picture of the steel column that is located at each of the corner openings of the alcove that was created at some point. We'll be keeping those in the beams that are tying those together with the facade. There's some existing beams that you can see up here, and then here's this column that continues on. But as you can see, the facade is in pretty poor shape. And then in the back, it got a little confusing over time with this project. This project's been reviewed, I think, in the past by DRB and PRS, and the owner actually thought a portion of this had been approved, and we had changed plans midstream, and so part of this has actually been constructed, and we apologize for that. But there were these existing openings on the far right, number 2 and number 3, and the intent is to take those openings and put in some doors, and I have drawings for that. And so you can see this has already been done. This is opening number 3. And that was for a rework of all there's an electrical room in there that covers the electrical for all the entire block. That was done. And we were actually removing the poles along the alleyway. So Denise and everybody will probably be happy about that we created a underground electric for that portion of downtown. And then the number 2 will be another opening similar to the electrical opening for exiting from the building. And then number 1 will just be boarded up. Bricked up, sorry. So here are the drawings. This is the site plan. And here are the floor plans and elevations. So the proposed facade on the front is going to be the basic. We're going to go back with a concrete base that'll be sealed. Here's that existing column. And then on top of the concrete base and in between the existing columns will be tube steel windows assemblies and tube steel beams, similar to kind of what we did at the Arizona, which is across from the Ronstadt Center, or at Time Market, similar kind of constructions. And then on the back facade, here's the portion that you saw that we accidentally did too soon. And then the new exit door will be similar with a full light in that door with glazing above it. And then we'll brick in the existing exit door, which is, I think, only 5'4" high. Can't remember how low it is, but. And then to give you a little sense of the detail, this is basically how this will work. Here, number 1, this little shape here is that
Bill, your audio cut out somehow.
How about now?
That's better.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you're
The one big change on this, other than redoing the facade, is the alcove is going to be shortened. As you can see here, it's quite deep, the existing alcove with the terrazzo floor. We're going to bring it in to this joint line right here, and the terrazzo will stay, and the wood floors will go up to it, and there will be some existing columns that'll stay, but we're pulling it in. And that was a little bit of a discussion with the Historic Commission, is the alcove, precious, whatever. And throughout the history of this building, like all other buildings in downtown, those alcoves move back and forth over time. Sometimes they're deeper, sometimes they're shallower. And so we're going into the shallow alcove phase of downtown Tucson right now. And then the rest of the thing is the meeting the DRB, the Rio Nuevo guidelines, just walking through that, the development zone. And if you guys read through the package, you can see that it kind of follows everything that Rio Nuevo wants. So even the shading. That's it.
Thank you, Bill. I do like the presentation when all the points for Rio Nuevo are addressed in it. It makes our job a lot easier. Any comments from the Design Review Board? Bill, could you put your last slide up that had the Rio Nuevo points on it?
Well, it's the last few slides. So like number 1 is here, talking about the development zone 2 through 6 here.
Is there any? Thank you. Yeah, is there any point? I mean, you've made the shade study. That's usually something people leave out, but you never do. Thank you. for that, and it looks like you're achieving. How do you achieve the shade? Is it just already there?
It's a north facade.
Right. So north facades are pretty good.
We need to talk about the shade thing sometime, but
I know
that's
you
not-
pointed out the calculations in the code are slightly a degree off or something.
well, it's all messed up. But I'm not going to take up TEP's time.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, just wanted to let you know, staff and Wrestling, you wanna say wrestling, you wanna say wrestling, you wanna say wrestling. You wanna provide a quick feedback on the status of the modifications on the shade requirements? Oh. I guess wrestling is not available, but yeah, we're working on it, Bill.
All right. Well, if there's no points that the DRB would like to raise on this, then maybe we can put the motion on the screen and someone can make a motion here.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion.
Great.
The Design Review Board has reviewed the applicant's project for compliance with Rio Nuevo Area Design Criteria and recommends to the Planning and Development Services Director approval, finding the project in compliance with the building design standards set forth in UDC sections 5.12.7.C1-15 and 5.12.7.D with no conditions.
I will second the motion.
Motion has been seconded. All right. I will call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Raise your hand. Aye.
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 The motion passes.
All right, thank you.
See you next time.
See ya.
All right, we're on item number 6. Case DRB 2118 TEP power poles on Silver Bell Road. Variance request continued. It's the Associated Board of Adjustments case, which was to be last month. I guess they did not have a quorum. And so it kind of got automatically continued onto our agenda. Here's my thought on this, DRB. My thought is we've already gone through the discovery phase, and heard the presentations. I don't want to hear another presentation from archaeology or anything like that. I don't feel like we need it. And I don't think we need another presentation from TEP. We've already heard what they're going to say. We've already heard what the neighborhood's going to say. So I think we need to pick up our conversation right where we left it 2 weeks ago when we had a motion and it failed because we had 2 abstains and 2 in favor of the motion. And so I could be out of line, but I don't really think we need the applicant to make any more presentation to us. What do you think, DRB?
This is Rosemary. So I was there 2 weeks ago for the first 2 hours and then I had to leave. I'm just curious whether there was any new information presented in the last half hour between 10 and 10:30 last week or 2 weeks ago. I didn't see anything. It looked like it was mostly discussion back and forth. And then the other question is, does TEP have any new information to present to us today?
I'll answer the first part and then maybe we can have TEP say if they have any new information. So after you dropped off, we had a motion to approve the installation, and then we had some stipulations or conditions, and the conditions were that TEP needed to verify that it was the absolute minimum pole height that they could get away with in the area. Is that failed motion? That's in the prior meeting minutes. Could we take a look at that, Maria? And
Yeah,
it was
Mr.
sort of
Chairman,
interesting.
So the members of the DRB, yeah, I have it highlighted here on the screen.
That is our motion? Oh, those are our conditions. So I'll read them. As the height of the new power pole is related to the height of adjacent city streetlight poles, the applicant must demonstrate that the City of Tucson streetlights are the absolute minimum required for public safety. So as high as the streetlights are, TEP needed to have a clearance. They needed to have a separation, and that's a safety issue. 2, the applicant must demonstrate the height of the new power poles or the absolute minimum allowed for public safety. And 3, landscape improvements within the scenic corridor are to be strategically positioned to provide relief, visual relief from the power pole locations for all users of the scenic corridor. And it was interesting that we had a vote of 2 in favor of it and 2 abstainers. And I honestly didn't know if that meant that we passed or not, but it meant that we did not pass because we needed a majority of the quorum. There were 4 people there, so we needed 3 votes one way or the other to pass a motion. So we had a motion that failed. And today we have 3 members, so we would need 2 votes to pass a motion. And I'll ask Ms. Clement if she wants to comment on the way we left things too, because she was there at the very end as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to comment on it. We asked for additional information from the applicant regarding the possibility of lowering the light poles. They did provide that in their material that they loaded onto today's agenda. And I would like for the applicant to go through both why street light poles cannot be reduced and then move on to the landscape plan if possible. I have comments with that, but I'd like to hear the applicant's presentation on the.
Okay, is the applicant, thank you, Carol. Is the applicant prepared to discuss the conditions from our last meeting?
Yes, we are. And I agree with you, Chairman Capello, that we don't need to have a full recap of the archaeological items. The slides today are focused on those 2 items, the pole heights as they relate to streetlights, as well as the landscaping. So I can provide a brief recap and then focus on those items if that's.
Okay, then proceed with your presentation.
Excellent, thank you. Can you all see the presentation on your screen?
Yes, we can.
Well, yeah, good morning. Thank you again for the continuing discussion to be heard in this matter of the TEP power poles on Silver Bell Road. During the previous meetings, you heard information pertaining to the designed alignment, as well as the comprehensive summary of the archaeological constraints presented by Ian Milliken from Pima County. As you mentioned, there's the motion to approve with 2 yes votes, 2 abstaining. Just as the brief recap in regards to the agenda for today, the City of Tucson has been working with project stakeholders, including TEP, on this Silver Bell Transportation Improvement Project. The TEP is being asked to relocate existing overhead power lines to make room for this voter-approved Silver Bell Road Transportation Improvement Project. And were it not for the transportation project, TEP would not be proposing this work. As such, the circumstances are not self-imposed. TEP has an existing overhead power line, and the proposed TEP scope of work to remain overhead, again, is not self-imposed and does not constitute a special privilege given the circumstances. And we're not increasing the voltage as stated in comments. So there are special circumstances applicable to this project, the most significant being the archaeological resources. And during the previous meeting, we reviewed a number of the technical matters pertaining to engineering specifications. We looked at the other utility conflicts, addressed the question of whether there's an alternative strategy that would be allowed for the underground utility. And again, we're not going to review all that information again today. During the previous discussion, there was a question about whether the underground utility could be located in the multi-use path. And this is potentially a very good idea. The MUP, the multi-use path, could be a possible location for a utility, but under other circumstances, that might be the best option. However, the project proponents have confirmed that there really is no viable option that avoids impacts to the archaeological resources. So the line as designed is overhead, and this is an effort to balance the ancestral rights versus modern ordinances. The project proponents and stakeholders have confirmed that we cannot prioritize the scenic aesthetics over the rich cultural resources associated with the project. Thus, the conclusion is that there's really no viable underground electric option for this project. And this is reached after many hours of collaborative planning and review. And thus, we look to the design review board to provide the valuable input and recommendations that you have provided and to approve the variance based on the recommendations that you see fit, taking all the factors into consideration. Now, two items that were identified during the past meeting were pole height and the request that TEP ensure that poles are not any taller than they need to be, which is great because TEP doesn't want to construct poles that are taller than they have to be, and the vegetation item to ensure that TEP structures are fully integrated into the project landscaping and native plant preservation plan. So both of these items we'll review today. Starting with the streetlights and utility integration, as a bit of background, there's a street lighting plan that's approximately 80 pages in length, and this is stamped with this seal of professional engineer. And to mention that this carries with it not only the technical competency, but also the ethical and professional commitment to the plan. So in this case, the plan for the street lighting was optimized. And then here's a quote from the plan that the street lighting plan was optimized, it was an optimized choice when various factors were taken into consideration. So during the previous meeting with the DRB, we discussed opportunities to review this plan and identify options for reducing pole heights for TEP power poles. And several of the different scenarios that we considered were shorter streetlights, but this would result in more poles, which would be more of an impact aesthetically, or a relocation of the poles closer to the road. This posed serious safety concerns. And so to note, both TEP and the city moved structures to optimize the design and meet the safety requirements for compliance. And so to note, there's also this plan, it's the utility adjustments, and it's a 16-page long plan to showcase that there has been a significant amount of work in coordinating the location of these various features, the streetlights versus the power poles and other project elements. TEP does not want to have poles that are taller than they're necessary to be. So in regards to safety and structure height, the relationship between the height of TEP power poles and the existing streetlight design. There's two items that come into play here that are worth considering, and they're called Sag and Sway, or Sway is sometimes referred to as blowout. So Sag is the line dropping during various loading conditions. And this graphic at the top left shows that condition where the line will become lower and sag deeper at those span lengths, depending on multiple various engineering specifications and load and temperature and environmental factors. So those different items are taken into consideration for engineering the height of the poles in relation to the streetlights. And sway is the lateral location as the line swings back and forth, essentially. So those are two key items in designing a power line in relation to other features like streetlights. These items were all taken into consideration through in-depth, detailed engineering, and therefore the power poles as planned are optimized for height. And to note, we had discussions with our engineer to confirm that ultimately the initial request for TEP poles was actually taller than the current design because the city wanted to have clearance for replacing streetlights and doing maintenance. And so we were able to work through a number of different engineering designs to come up with a pole height that was lower than originally requested, but still meets the safety requirements for city crews when maintaining streetlights and working on those structures in proximity to power lines. So those pole heights for both the streetlights and the power poles have been optimized, and there's been recent discussion. I mean, your recommendations are taken seriously, and I can assure you that there's been, renewed and current revisions and reviews to confirm that there is no real opportunities remaining for further relocation. So, I mean, just to let you know that your input is very valuable and appreciated and is being taken into consideration. The second item is pertaining to native plant preservation and landscaping. And on the previous slide, we showed some of the native plant preservation and landscaping plans, and there was some, I guess, concerns that the TEP poles weren't fully integrated into those plans. And so these slides, help to illustrate sort of behind the scenes look almost into the geographic information system, or GIS, that shows the structures. So the blue dots are TEP structures planned for installation. The orange dots are TEP structures that will be removed. And the native plant inventory points are seen in the green features, various triangle, circle, diamond shapes. And so this shows where TEP structures are in relation to the native plant preservation plan. And again, just to look at the attribute table from that native plant inventory that provides the guidance of whether that plant would be preserved in place, transplanted on site, or removed from site. The TEP will coordinate and collaborate with this native plant inventory for all of our work to ensure that the native plant preservation is implemented according to plan. And then subsequently with the landscaping plan, this illustrates where TEP poles are integrated into the plan, and a full complete plan set was provided as well. And just to illustrate that, TEP is in fact working collaboratively with the city for this fully integrated design. And hopefully this landscaping plan with TEP poles helps to more clearly illustrate that, and per your recommendation. So yeah, just in closing, I wanted to touch base on those two items that were a continuation from previous discussion, and just to reiterate several key points that, the project stakeholders have worked collaboratively together to develop this integrated plan, and this has occurred over the course of many years. The overall plan will improve the safety, functionality, and aesthetics of Silver Bell Road. The utility infrastructure is fully integrated with the transportation design and will ultimately provide that more cohesive, consistent, and modernized Silver Bell Road corridor. And then also a key point from the previous meeting was conveyed by Ruslan, I believe, was that the Scenic Corridor Ordinance was enacted without consideration of the archaeological resources, and it was likely not the intent to force undergrounding where doing so impacts the ancestral or other archaeological resources. And for these reasons, we feel that the current design, per your additional requirements, should you have any today, really is the optimized design and is the best fit for the project. So welcome your continued recommendations should you have any, and appreciate your time today as well as on the previous DRB meeting. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Carol, your hand is up.
Yes, Mr. Applicant, could you put the typical section on screen, or Maria? The typical roadway section that was sent out a couple days ago.
Yes, I can pull that
Thank
up.
you.
Or Maria, yeah.
Did you? Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right. I think there was somewhat of a misunderstanding regarding the native plant preservation ordinance. I wasn't so concerned about that as I was with the integration of the proposed new landscaping with the TE poles, and therefore I asked for a set of plans showing the location of the TE poles, which you did indeed provide. What I want to talk about here with the typical section, mind you, this is a typical section, is that we understand the many constraints associated with this project. And due to the archaeological study, the requested variance of above ground utilities has been requested. Given this, I'm hoping with my comments to improve the experience of the multi-use path users. First of all, I asked last time, why can't the multi-use path meander away from the edge of travel lane, away from the roadway? I looked at the set of plans. You can see it in this typical section. It's just a 2-foot no man lands offset from edge of curb or edge of travel lane, whatever you want to call it, 6 foot wide, and then landscaping there. I did look at the plans, and if we could go to the set of plans now that show in greater detail the roadway layout. Thank you. I would like to point out where I think the path can be meandered away from the roadway, improving the experience of the user groups. Now I want to see the plans with, yes, thank you so much. Okay, let's forget sheet 1. Let's go where it jumps to the east side. Let's go to sheet 2. This is going to be hard to see, but I looked at these plans closely. And on these plans, first of all, I do not see the right-of-way line on the northern part of the project. I have a feeling that the right-of-way line extends beyond. Can you point out to me where your right-of-way line is on this drawing? Because I'm going to be asking, can we, in this portion, meander the multi-use path away from the roadway and set it up so that it is a more better experience for the user groups, because then that would allow shade trees on the south side of the pathway, providing shaded, healthy, walkable pathways. So my first question is, where is the right-of-way line on this plan?
Kevin, I can stop sharing my screen if you want to share yours, if it's easier.
No, that's fine. I think the right-of-way, while not labeled, appears to coincide with the area that would be in the dotted portion of that graphic. And then to reiterate,
I don't think so. I don't think it's where the hydro seeding is going. I think the right-of-way line is outside of that. Because if I look down, if I look up project, you have native preservation plants extending beyond. I don't think the right-of-way line is the fill. I think it extends beyond.
I could answer that. This is Scott Martinez with McGann Associates.
Yes, perfect. I was gonna say.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Thank
McGann,
you.
No problem. As you know, with these projects, there's lots of improvements in driveways. In this one, it's pretty close to the fill line in here. It's the dash line with the 2 dashes, 2 short dashes, right along. Yeah, right there. It varies throughout the project, but in general, that's our project limits.
All right. If we go up station on the project documents, it does vary further out. Is there a possibility to meander the path away from the roadway. Again, trying to improve the experience for the user groups and getting the opportunity for shade onto the pathway. In other words, locating the trees to the south of the pathway, rather than the pathway a 3-foot offset from face of curb.
One of the issues we have is our clear zone. We typically, I don't know that it's mandated for this project, but from the
Yes, I'm familiar.
Travel lane closest to the pathway, we have a 20-foot offset. I know Nate likes to hear offsets, but that's our.
The clear zone is a 20-foot clear zone from travel lane?
From the edge of the travel lane. So where we have a bike lane, so the bike lane is not included in that.
Correct.
But to the travel lane, closest to the walkway or to the curb.
And is that for the multi-use path or for trees?
It's for trees to avoid any,
Yeah, collisions. I understand.
Gotcha.
Well, I just going up station, there seems to be space where the path could meander away and shaded walkable pathways could be provided. I don't feel like the entire length of project has been closely examined with this in mind.
Yeah, I think even the engineer can help me with this one, but I think we're trying to, in our section, limit the amount of disturbance to the existing.
Well, you still have in your section, you have your landscape fill slope. Yeah, that might have to be moved further out. You might have to bring in more fill. But
yeah, there are ways to do that. I agree.
Given the sensitivity of this project and the fact that you are saying you cannot underground due to archaeological constraints, I think every thought and consideration ought to be given to provide a healthy walkable corridor, pedestrian corridors that are shaded. And I don't think that's been done on this project. You haven't gotten down with a fine-tooth comb, okay, where can we meander this pathway and get it away from the road and get shade onto this pathway?
Let me ask Scott, is this pathway, this multi-use pathway, does it align completely with the street curb?
Yes.
It does. That's the section that we're working with. Yeah, so we have that throughout the whole project.
And you arrived at that sort of concept by following the principle of reducing the overall footprint?
Reducing the footprint and yeah, exactly.
We had heard from the project team that they had all the stakeholders together and they kind of had like a theme that they were trying to guide themselves with. And I think, Kevin, you can remind us what that is, but it was like reduce or make no impact.
It's avoid the primary objective is to avoid impact and then minimize.
Avoid impact and minimize. So maybe what DRB member Carol Clement is suggesting is maybe we deviate from the minimize and avoiding to add some more pizzazz to the.
Or, if I may say, Mr. Chairman, enhance the experience of the MUP user group.
Right, which is basically pizzazz.
Yeah, but I'm trying to use more.
I hear you. Yeah, that's well said. Very well said. Enhance it doesn't do anything to soften the blow of tall power poles, but it does enhance the project overall, given the constraints.
Correct. It would provide and a very important thing, and this goes back years ago when I was working with Wheatshoff Associates and LIBA with the promotion of healthy walkable sidewalks, pedestrian corridors through the use of shade. Being able to shade the sidewalks is paramount in our desert climate. Otherwise, what you have now is maybe some early morning summer sun casting, the trees casting shade onto the MUP. I mean, early morning. That's the only time this MUP is going to be shaded. If we were to sort of reverse placement of the MUP with the shade line along the road, I understand clear zones and all that. But if we're able to reverse that, we are working towards greater shaded pedestrian corridors. I know that's not going to be able to be done throughout the entire length of the project, but I think if another look at this is taking where do we have room to meander this path and create shaded, healthy, walkable sidewalks? Where can we do this? I don't think that's been done on this project. The draft person offset 3 foot from back of curb, and there was the MUP path.
Scott, do you have a sense of any shade that will be cast to this in multiple use path?
No, it was, Carol's right on the money there. We always look for those opportunities as well. I think it's more about keeping that road section as narrow as possible from our end. But I do agree that, you know, there are cut slopes and fill slopes that would cost a little more extra to the project to be able to meander that path in certain areas, and potentially some retaining walls to make that work. So I think there was obviously costs are considered, but it would be a better experience for sure if we could meander that path.
So Carol, would you think that they could achieve 50% of the path into shade?
I've looked at these drawings, but because I can't quite figure out where their right-of-way line is on the north, it's hard to say. But looking at the topo, there are places where it's quite flat on the north side. There are places where it's steep and you'd have to bring the path back closer to the road. I really couldn't say. I think maybe I think maybe so, but but don't hold me to that. But I think there are quite a few lengths of area that the topo is flat enough that we could extend.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Carol, these are very important questions about them enhancing the experience for multi-users. But along Silver Bell Road, I've lived there over 30 years. There are no sidewalks. There are no pedestrians along that road. Everyone uses the bike loop along the river, and to avoid impacts of power poles, move them 1/10 of a mile to the east. It avoids all problems with the power poles. That is the alternative solution that has not been explored by TEP. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. TEP representative, tell us again, please, why you can't move it to your eastern existing corridor, whatever that's called. I'm sorry, I can't remember it.
Well,
tell us again.
Yes, of course. Yeah, one of the very significant reasons is that doing so would move this project outside of the APE, the area of potential effect, which was presented by Ian during the second meeting. And doing so is not an option in the scope of the project. So it's not a viable option considering the project footprint.
Kevin,
why?
Additional
Why is it not a viable option? Just convenience?
No, because of the area of potential effect is a permitted area. It's the project, you could think of it as the project footprint, and it's an area that was defined for this project, and moving it outside of that footprint is not an option.
Kevin,
in the scope of this project, yes.
Kevin, this solution that we're asking you to comment on is outside of the box, right? And you guys are dealing inside the box. Was it considered early on? I realize you guys have, see, one of the things that I would like to remark is it's really unfortunate to go for request of variance with approved plans, because at that point, all the collaboration is over.
Right.
You know, and I'm not saying that you should have done it differently, but if the process could have been, we early on identify conceptually a variance that we're going to need, then you can have problem-solving partners in the community and solve the challenge. But here we are already with approved plans. If you can recall early discussions, did they discuss taking these poles out of the project and putting them, I guess, along the loop is the idea?
Great question, Mr. Chairman.
Well, considering a design modification of that nature, I mean, keep in mind that the Silver Bell power line serves members and home sites, commercial properties along Silver Bell. And this line has both the 46 kV subtransmission as well as distribution. And so if you move that line over to the east into that transmission right away, you would need distribution connection and you would have to redesign the distribution network. So there'd be complications on that front. And then additional right-of-way and right-of-way area, that's another area of new acquisition where TP currently occupies an existing right-of-way. And to relocate the line is really a complete separate project in and of itself. And so this project is designed in accord with the existing right-of-way, but then the transportation project.
Kevin,
So
my question is, was that identified and thought through early on in the process, or was it not identified and not considered, and here we are? Do you recall?
I do not, and no, I don't recall, because the early transmission and transportation discussions, that option of moving to a new transmission right away is very much outside of the box, and to the point where that's just really a separate discussion about reconfiguring an electric utility, and very much outside of the box, where this is focused in the project area to address the needs of the project.
Okay.
Pardon me. I think this is Denise Baldwin speaking. I think that the true question is, has it been considered, since this is a fill project, has it been considered by TEP that the design by TEP and plans by TEP would be pushed forward to include their designs with the fill? And this, the incremental difference in cost seems like this is, to protect the archaeological artifacts. This seems like if we're going to have TEP underground, this is really the best case scenario, because it's already there. They don't have to even bury, they just have to get their lines, their encasements there on the ground, and then have the fill put around them. And that's been brought up by the board already. And reconfiguring the collaborative planning, it has been there. So this is the question that the board needs to be looking at. Has that plan been submitted and worked with TEP? And that, because so I would submit that question to TEP.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the public comments. I want to make
Mr. Chair? Members of the board, if I might interject, this is Russlin. This is a public meeting, not a public hearing, and the call to the audience is closed. This is now the time for the board to have a discussion with the applicant. It is not a meeting where the public addresses the applicant. And so I just want to clarify, point of order, that is not the proper procedure for this type of a hearing. Thank you.
Ms. Wells, I was about to make that same finer point. Okay, continuing our discussion. Carol, you were on track thinking about a meandering path. We talked to Kevin about this alternate idea of removing TEP from the project. That's
Yes.
a bigger idea.
Yes,
but let's think of the purview of the design review board for a moment, so that we don't go into the weeds. Yeah. So the purview is we're basically the first draft recommendation for the Board of Adjusters. The Board of Adjusters are just like us, and they're interested in what our opinion is. So to make their job easier, and they're looking at the same criteria that we must look at. We have only one sticking point from our last review, and that sticking point is the variance, the very least amount required to provide the relief. And Maria, you're doing such an excellent job on the screen. Could you put the Board of Adjusters criteria on so we could see it?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's down at the bottom there. Right? So we've discussed all 7 of these twice now. This is our 3rd time. It's not a special circumstance. That because there are special circumstances, strict enforcement of the UDC will deprive such property of privileges. Sometimes it's hard to read the language, but my sense is that the viewshed zoning, it was not specific, but general to many locations, and it did not contemplate the exact conditions of this project, which include the archaeological resources. And when we saw sort of an exhibit showing like the civilizations right underneath the ground, it was clear to me that the viewshed did not contemplate that in their blanket recommendations. 2, special circumstances were not self-imposed. The project was imposed by the will of the people, I guess, in a vote. We all voted for improving this road. So TEP is not creating their own project here, but they are impacted by the voters voting on this road.
But Mr. Chairman, may I, just a thought on my part, thank you, that it was TEP who decided to put these big power lines within this roadway corridor, whereas my question is, what is the possibility of shifting these big guys over to their more eastern existing corridor?
The problem is there's no answer to that question.
Correct. So that is, you know, I'm sorry I'm being such a stickler on this, but it is a big deal for the people, the neighbors of that area, and for a scenic corridor. It's a big deal. And I'm going to be just a stickler on looking at all possibilities. You know, that to me, that's, you know, as we gain more insight, more information on this project, it seems like there are more questions that come up that are unanswered. I'm sorry.
Well, one quick note on that is, as presented in Ms. Baldwin's presentation, that area, if we did relocate to the east, that area is still within the scenic corridor zone as defined by the UDC. So we wouldn't be avoiding any within 400 feet. So,
but at least
it's
away from the user groups, away from the road, and you're combining eyesore.
Ms. Wells and Mr. Chair, is it okay if I jump in and kind of add to what Kevin's talking about?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, thank you for this. My name is Rick Ellis. I'm with PAG RTA, but I've been involved with this project since its inception, working back with the county, the city, and Miranda when we tackled this project in the beginning. As a general rule, to expand on what Kevin's talking about, when we look at options on this and recognizing the significance of this corridor and the complexities of trying to juggle all these things, we wanted to, and as you've heard Kevin talk and as you heard Ian talk, avoid minimize. And that was the key thing, so that when choices like this would come up, and they would get suggested in the early design iterations, is there would look at, so to pick on an example of moving the lines, is that going to cause more impact? Is that going to expand with the need to now put into an existing or even if it is an existing area, but as Kevin mentioned, service lines now have to be added and provided. So as we look at these things, are we going to create more impact than what we are? Every aspect, every feature, every element went through that whole kind of holistic approach. Could we pick the minimum for functionality? Are the lane widths the minimum they can be and still provide safe and efficient travel? Are the walkways, are the medians, are the radiuses, all the features, all the elements to make sure, A, we're minimizing our footprint impact, slopes, widths, heights, all those elements, plus being extremely sensitive and cognizant to the undergrounding, because that is a significant nature. So as all the design elements evolved from 10 years ago all the way up through current, it had that mantra in mind. So I guess as you're talking through all that, was that utilized? Maybe that didn't get a full depth investigation, because talking through it qualitatively, we could determine that's going to create extra impact, that's going to expand that cage that Ian talked about, and now we're dealing with more footprint, more impact, all those type of things. And that was what we wanted to avoid at all costs. So I don't know if that helps, but I wanted to make sure you kind of have that context as you're having the discussion of those items.
Thank you, Rick. That does help, because, to me, what's important is the project goal of avoid and minimize. And that's kind of the lens that you used early on from the beginning on a complicated project like that. And that's how you arrived at what you did. And it's not like it was designed by one person. TEP didn't go off and then come back. It was a collaboration, and it's, I believe, reasonable to suppose that if we started over at the beginning with the professionals and everyone, a different set of professionals, with the same project goals, that you would arrive at something that is very, very similar to where we're at now. It's not unreasonable to believe that. And unfortunately, we're at the very end of a collaboration, not at the beginning of a collaboration.
And that's a true statement. And you summarized that absolutely brilliantly, because that was the paramount aspect and effort throughout the whole ordeal, even during the early collaboration efforts with the residents, citizens, neighbors, and the task force that was formed to help advise and guide. Maintaining that. They embraced that mantra as we did as well as a design team.
So, if I may add, okay, project goal, avoid and minimize. But it sounds like to me, the neighborhood stakeholders were not involved in that decision.
I'm curious about that as well. And maybe we could have staff kind of review the public comment and how the public interacted with this project from the beginning, not just right now. That's a tough.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yeah.
Rustlin. I don't know that we have anyone here from Department of Transportation and Mobility to address that comment. This portion of the roadway project is a Department of Transportation, Mobility, and RTA project.
Okay. Well, I don't know how germane it is to the task at hand for us, but it is. I feel like we're not the right moment for getting input from the public, and the public seems like, from what I'm hearing, they haven't been part of this project.
Yeah, I agree, Nathan.
But I don't know how germane it is to the task at hand for the Design Review Board. Our task is to look at the application and these 7 criterion. So,
okay.
So anyways,
if you'd like for me to speak to that, we represent.
I don't really want to. Unfortunately, I'm not opening it up to the public right now.
Well, we represent the residents in the area, so if you'd like the answer to that, I can provide that to you.
I would like the answer, but in 1 minute only. It's 9:04, and I'll watch the clock because I got to be careful with the time here.
They have not been involved, and the meetings that they've had with TEP have been informational, not participatory, and so the design review committee has been more about the archaeological artifacts and design of culverts, not about TEP. So that is the problem, and the problem about the electric lines has not come up, and this has been a major blow to the neighbors, and the neighbors are left wondering, well, now what? And everybody is saying, well, we would like to have these lines underground, but now TEP is saying, well, here are the facts. And they're befuddled because they feel that this is what they have to live with, and that's not.
There have been some meetings in the past with the public.
Yes, right in September of this year, they had a neighborhood meeting describing what happened, or what they are going to be living with, and that was their information. So if you consider that participation, okay, but does that do it for you?
Right. Well, I don't. It's only a point of, thank you, Denise. It's only a point of curiosity because if you notice points 1 through 7, it doesn't say adequate public participation. So that's not sort of the lens and the job description that we have here this morning.
What about point number 5, Nathan? The granting of the variance shall not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to other property or improvements in the neighborhood in which the property is located. I think the Miss Denise I'm sorry if I have your name wrong, that when she showed that section of neighborhood is sandwiched between these giant power poles is slightly ridiculous.
Right, in a scenic corridor. Corridor.
Yeah, I can see, you bought a house. If I bought a house in a scenic corridor, I'd be pretty excited about the scenic corridor because I could be sure that nobody installed a bunch of billboards and all this other business, and how disappointing it would be now that there's going to be power poles in my backyard view.
Both sides.
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. I am ready to make a motion based on this if you want, or we can continue discussion.
I have a question related to this. So, we've talked about, is it possible to move the corridor to the east? If that's not a possibility, would it be possible to take the line on the east side and move it to the new pole on the west? So at least those those residents wouldn't be sandwiched between two sets of power poles. You're muted right now.
Kevin, if you're speaking, you're muted.
All right, is that coming through?
Yeah.
I already had to do the *6. So is that coming through?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so as we discussed on the previous meetings, the intent to avoid and minimize impacts on if we were to locate the line on the west side of Silver Bell in that area, due to hill slope, topography, and terrain, the project would be required to excavate significantly more fill and cut activity. And so the impacts on the west side would be substantial. And for that reason, it was relocated to the east.
I'm sorry, I think my question wasn't clear. So I wasn't suggesting that you move the power poles to the west side of Silver Bell. I was suggesting that you take the existing line to the east that's already there, the second set of poles, and move it to the new set of power poles that you were proposing that will be located on the east side of Silver Bell. Is that a possibility?
So let me make sure. So there's the existing line is on the west. So we're talking about the segment from Sweetwater south to Goree. There's an existing line on the west side that's going to propose to move to the east side. And then the lines on the west will be removed. Does that get to what your question is? I don't think it does. But
it might help to bring up the image that shows the section of neighborhood that's sandwiched between two sets of power poles.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that section that is on the east side, there by Kippy Trail, to move that further east?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would get back to the other issues of moving outside of the project footprint and then also moving into an area where there's no utility right of way for that. Yeah, so that would be a complete relocation of the utility right of way, and that would bring up, additional acquisition. And so that rendering there shows the neighborhood. Go back up one slide, I believe. Yeah, so that relocation further to the east would, but again, go completely outside of the box of the project.
Yeah.
And open up a number of other issues with right-of-way acquisition and location of a new utility on that side.
It's already happening. It's going to happen in 2 years.
Wow.
This is a question I want to ask to the DRB I know it's going to be tempting for the public to jump in, but I don't really want the public to jump in. The question is, these poles, are they detrimental to public welfare? That's my first question. And do they injure? That's my second question. How is it detrimental to the public welfare? The welfare being, I think, the well-being and safety of the public. So in other words, you can't have a variance that it creates a danger to the public. Or you can't give a variance that would open a nuclear waste facility right next to the public. That would be clear detriments to the public welfare and injurious to neighboring properties. So yes. How are power poles in that category, in your mind, Carol and Rosemary, public, detrimental to the public welfare and injurious to properties. Full disclosure, I live with power poles in my alleyway. I mean, I don't feel injured by that. And I don't feel that it's detrimental to the people in my household that there are power poles in my alleyway. And they're ugly.
Right. I think there are many people believe that the electrical current running through these lines can cause brain damage. I don't know if that's true or not, but
especially if you touch it. If you touch it, it causes a lot of brain damage.
Yeah. Or there's also the resale value. Your house sandwiched between two giant electrical poles is not going to have the resale value that it would if it was located in a truly scenic corridor.
So that you're speculating on the economic impact of these power poles.
Injurious. I do view that as being injurious to property.
What's your thought, Rosemary?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have enough information to know about, things like brain damage or any of that. We haven't been presented with that information, so I don't think that's under our purview. I think property value is definitely consideration. And I would like to know what the overall plan is, if that neighborhood will remain sandwiched between two sets of poles, or if TEP is looking at mitigating that in some way.
So the property values are just under number 6, and the poles will be located in right-of-way, which is consistent with location of poles throughout the city. So.
Oh. Yeah, there it is, impair property value. Sorry, I hadn't gotten to number 6. Well, I do believe it would impair property values, and I think that this line of electrical poles was somewhat randomly included in this roadway project without fully looking at the possibility of combining it into TEP's already existing corridor.
Yeah, that's not correct. As Rick mentioned, it was far from random, and there was intense deliberation and consideration of a number of different factors that led to the current design.
I don't know. There's just so many negative sides, whether it's injurious to property, injurious to birds and wildlife, injurious to whatever, or not fully looked at in terms of the possibility of undergrounding or shifting. I don't know, you guys. I'm just feeling, once again, the more information I find out about this project, the less I want to provide this variance.
Okay, let me ask you another question, and this is to staff or maybe the applicant. And the question is this a phase 2 of a project? I thought maybe I saw an example earlier on in that stretch of road where these power poles were already installed above grade.
You are correct. Yeah, this is phase 2. So phase 1 went from Grant to Goree. Phase 2 goes from Goree to El Camino del Cerro. And phase 3 goes from Camino del Cerro to Ina.
And in phase 1, did they have the same constraints of archaeology?
Phase 1 is an overhead design.
But Was it designed with the same constraints and knowledge of the archaeology underground?
It is similar archaeology, and Pima County was also involved in that segment of the project.
And was phase one granted a variance from the view shed?
There was no variance proceedings on phase one.
Was phase one in a view shed?
Scenic view, scenic corridor.
Scenic corridor, thank you.
Yes, Silver Bell Road is a scenic corridor in city jurisdiction through that length.
So they had the same conditions that we're considering now, and they did not get a variance though. This is the first time that you're seeking a variance on phase two. I'm just getting back. That's some of the historical information there. Yeah.
Why wasn't phase one part of a variance? Was it before the scenic corridor designation?
No, I think that's probably a separate question for the city. I think that one was, and I don't have an answer for you on that one.
That's fine. This is all background information.
Yes.
Phase 3 and phase 4 and phase 5 and so on. Whatever we decide now, or whatever the Board of Adjusters decides now, is going to be a precedent. So that there is no precedent for us to lean on because these 7 points weren't considered before, it sounds like. Okay. That's an interesting point, and we had to really uncover that one.
Yep.
I'm wondering if staff can answer that question, why there wasn't a variance proceeding for phase one.
I don't know the answer. Roslyn, are you familiar with it?
I don't know why it wasn't sought. I know that the permits to locate the poles in the right-of-way are right-of-way permits. And I believe that, if my understanding is correct, those permits were issued without consideration that it was also a scenic corridor, which is a separate ordinance that's regulated by Planning and Development Services, a different department. So it was discovered that that had not been considered in that first phase.
Yeah, and there is, to add to that, there is some discretion in so per the franchise agreement for the location of utilities within city right-of-way, there's discretion in the city's behalf of whether it may require, but it's not obligated. So the choice to pursue a variance or not, I think, could be informed by the city. But I think in this case, the intent was to have the project go through this process to enable input from the public, to enable more comprehensive review and discussion by the boards, to obtain your recommendations, and to route it through that process was the decision that would be most appropriate for this project, for this phase. And this, city staff can certainly elaborate on that.
Okay. Any other burning questions or clarifications that the DRB might have before considering a motion?
I have one more question. Since you brought up, the aspect of it, this being a phased project, and this is phase 2 of at least 3, I'm curious whether the archaeological study's been completed on the phase 3 portion of the project.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I can answer that. At this point in time, we are aware that there will be archaeological efforts required. We've had initial discussions only to set apart the overall programmatic approach that we're going to be using, but a lead jurisdiction has not been identified at this time for the implementation of that, since that project or the future phases actually transition from the city jurisdiction into the county and town of Marana. So those will be efforts still to come, but the overall corridor is under the umbrella of a programmatic agreement that we worked through with the Corps of Engineers so that we could tackle it in this manner to be able to take a holistic approach. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. So I just want to say, I feel like there isn't really any new information presented today that we haven't already heard. We reviewed it 2 weeks ago in detail. We looked at the aspect of view corridor versus the archaeological, and unfortunately we can't satisfy both of those. We can't preserve the archaeology and also preserve the view corridor with the solutions presented. And I feel like we have to make a choice.
It's a good point, Rosemary.
Yeah, I would like, if I could say that I feel like the neighborhood, the owners, the stakeholders were not fully integrated into this process. And given the, Maria, could you go down to number 5 on the variance criteria? And given, yeah, number 5 and 6, yeah, that I feel that this variance will diminish and impair property values and also will be somewhat injurious to the neighborhood. So I am leaning towards opposition to the variance, especially given that the option of moving their poles over to their more eastern corridor, I do not feel has been fully vetted or taken out of this project, and it's another project.
If I could speak to that briefly, because there has been public involvement. So the Tucson Mountain Association webpage has a link to the Silver Bell Corridor project. And if you'd like, I could share my screen for context.
It sounds like, no worries. It sounds like to me that plans were brought to the neighborhood association already done. There was just sort of, you were wanting their stamp of approval without their true involvement.
No, this goes back to 2010. So there's the link on the webpage has information that goes back to the Silver Bell Road info. And so there's links that go back to the project page, and the project page has information that speaks to the project as a whole going back multiple years. And that's been available to the public on their webpage and other webpages. So I think that's fair to say that there's been substantial amount of public outreach and online information available for this project.
Carol, on your
going
point,
back years.
Yeah.
But,
Carol,
but when it came down to design time, which is in the near past, not 10 years ago,
yeah,
I feel like the stakeholders were not listened to, were not fully involved.
that is important feedback, Carol. That I believe that is important feedback, but it's not part of our business this morning. But it is very important feedback, and probably the #1 challenge in public works is what you just put in. So it's not as if that's like an easy thing to do.
No.
But yeah, it is. You are noting a very significant challenge with a project like this. I want to go back to number 6, impair the property values, or substantially diminish or impair property values. I would be sensitive to that, but we do not have information that would suggest that new power poles on a public street next to a house diminish property values or impair them from appreciating.
But Nathan, it's intuitive. If you're looking at a house that's sandwiched between 2 big power lines as opposed to another house that is not, isn't it intuitive?
What's the condition of the house now? I mean, in relation to power lines, they're already there.
Yeah, and what are their property
And
values?
it's
Does it sell
not,
for?
it's not dissimilar to most of the neighborhoods in Tucson that get aerial service, and there's big ugly wires that come float through their backyard to their water, to their power
Yes.
meter.
But this person bought a house in what is a so-called scenic corridor.
That is true, but this isn't dissimilar. It's not a dissimilar condition, except they're replacing some junky old wood power poles, which are the kind that I look at in my backyard, that look they're doing their job, right? With a more structural and much taller power pole.
With a base of 4 or 5 feet diameter. It's a different animal.
No, the base diameters are only 24 to 36. There's no 5-foot diameter.
Okay, 36-inch diameter. Thank you.
Or 24, yeah.
So impair property values, I would think that's more like a garbage dump next door, or a variance request to allow a type of business that was objectionable. That would impair some property values because families may not want to be next to all that. But this is, power is something that goes throughout the whole city. And I am aware only peripherally that along Campbell Avenue, TEP was proposing a giant transmission, and the neighborhoods there opposed it, and they teamed up with their council representative. And I believe the answer there is TEP is going to bite the bullet and go underground.
Huh.
That doesn't, that's not a material fact for this case, but it is sort of similar in some ways, where the neighborhoods got involved early with the help of their representation and changed a design approach of TEPs. I think that in that case, it was TEP trying to upgrade their system, which they need to do.
Yes.
And so anyways, there's another case where they did go underground, probably through great expense, but don't worry, we're all going to pay for it. It's not like it's not coming out of, there's no such thing as a free lunch. It will get paid for by the people that use the power.
My heart goes out to those people in that neighborhood that bought in the so-called scenic corridor, and now it's full of poles. Big poles.
Maybe their property values are going to go up because the road is going to be better looking now.
Yeah, and the poles were there prior to the enactment of the scenic corridor zone ordinance. So there's been overhead power there prior to the ordinance, prior to the classification of the Silver Bell Road as a scenic corridor.
Yeah, but this project's going to make it more pronounced, bigger.
Yeah, and I would echo kind of what Chairman Kapler was saying, is that the existing infrastructure is composed of a mix of wood poles and steel poles and poles of different vintage. And this is really going to serve to modernize that Silver Bell corridor and make it, more appealing and more attractive as far as more cohesive infrastructure and a much safer roadway, because currently the congestion and with all of those no houses going in, the traffic volumes on Silver Bell are going to increase substantially to the point where, having this transportation improvement is going to improve the safety and public welfare of the corridor above and beyond any impact from relocation of existing overhead power lines. So overall, it's going to be a good modernization and the landscaping, and it's going to be a net improvement for Silver Bell corridor.
But not a scenic corridor improvement.
I'm curious if the property values tanked or diminished substantially with the phase one work. And nobody has that information right now. And, you would need some sort of real estate broker or some data from the assessor's office to figure that out. But in general, the project reads as an improvement to me.
Right.
And a more cohesive organization of the electric overhead power.
Mr. Chairman, could we ask for that information? Does this type of project, what are past case studies in terms of property values with large transmission lines coming into neighborhoods?
So what we would need for that is a broker's opinion of value or a, what do you call these? Appraisal.
Appraisals, yeah. Oh,
yeah,
God.
but you could get broker opinion of value. That's sort of a shorthand appraisal, but that's just an opinion. And so is the appraisal, by the way, just an opinion. But at least it would be something to look at. I don't mind asking. So who would be responsible to produce a report on possible impact on property values, Maria? Is that even? It seems like we should not ask the applicant for that, and we should not ask the neighborhood association for that.
It has to be a neutral party.
It seems like it should be somebody that's not related to this case. And how are we doing as far as being appropriate with this request?
Yeah, good question, Nathan.
Wrestling.
Oh, quiet all the way around.
I don't feel that that's the purview of the city staff as part of this request.
So the city staff should not prepare the report.
We are not real estate brokers.
Ms. Wells, do you know of other projects that have indeed sought this kind of information in terms of diminishing or impairing property values, how they have approached it?
Member Clements, I'm not aware specifically as it relates to a variance request.
Yeah.
There have been some discussions at a general level on occasion, but nothing at this level. Right.
That sounds like a highly relevant exhibit if the proposed if we're going to claim that the proposed variance shall not substantially diminish property values, and that is a subjective, it's somewhat subjective property values, especially these days. Thank you very much, Zillow. We would need some sort of exhibit to base our rationale on. And then, so that's number 6. Number 5, public welfare or injurious to property. I'm just not convinced that we have information that it's injurious. And guess what? If we decide that a overhead power line is injurious, then, where do we go from there? Because we certainly all do enjoy using this electricity.
Ms. Wells, Mr. Chair, I can interject some anecdotal history with regards to your previous statement regarding values, if you care.
Sure, please.
And it's based on anecdotal, similar, not exact, dealing with this. But through my investigations on past projects, what I had learned is, and Mr. Chair, you kind of hit upon it, there are many, many variables that come into play when evaluating property values, and to isolate it to just one single situation proved to be very challenging. So when I was working with appraisers, folks doing the estimates, doing their valuations on that, There is a high degree of subjectivity. There are parameters, there are guidelines, so a lot of that came into play. But there is a lot of variability due to that subjectivity, as much as they try to follow protocol guidelines and have definable type of criteria. So in my particular instance, dealing with noise mitigation, it was very hard to say a before and after evaluation could be tied directly to the inclusion or the change in a feature type. So if that adds to your sense that that's a hugely complex type of effort, and to tie into what Ms. Wells does, it requires kind of an expertise that's typically outside of the project purview, if that helps.
Yep. And
Yeah,
that's
as
good. But I
suspected,
will
it's
add,
not an easy answer.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That
it
was
is-
my
it is-
experience as well when I talked to folks.
It'll
What
be
was that?
inconclusive. Well, if we get a report, it's likely to be inconclusive, and we would be right where we're at right now,
Yeah.
having to make a judgment call.
Right. And my judgment call is that it would, especially the sandwich houses, what I'm calling the sandwich houses, it would diminish and impair property values. Granted, totally subjective, but that sort of like Occam's razor, the obvious.
I mean, would that be substantial is another condition of that consideration too.
Well, I'm going to throw this out. I think all property values in Tucson are substantially diminished by the general condition of our roads. Have you ever tried riding a bike on a road in Tucson?
My truck has a hard time.
Okay, so we're all substantially diminished. Now go to another city where they've taken care of their asphalt, and it's like, wow. So again, we're not going to me, this isn't, I don't have a smoking gun with this substantially diminished property values argument.
But remember, Nathan, big picture in mind, they're asking for a variance going outside of the established code parameters.
And that was because of special circumstances that were not self-imposed. Number two.
But I think they shot themselves in the foot somewhat by not integrating and listening to the neighborhood stakeholders from at the design, critical design time. They decided that they were going to, their project goal was to avoid and minimize. But as I said earlier, it sounded like to me, they came to at the critical point in design, they came to the neighborhood, this is what you get, with, expecting them to say, okay, yes, okay, and not involving the neighborhood stakeholders in the design process and hearing their concerns. If so, they would have heard that the neighbors are very concerned about giant power poles.
So it sounds to me like in terms of design, if we were starting from the beginning, which we're not, but if we're starting from the beginning, there would be three options. One would be overhead lines, two would be buried lines, and three would be to reroute the power line elsewhere. Right. It's an existing line, it's an existing overhead line that they're proposing to move to the opposite side of the street. We've already examined the possibility of burying the line and determined that because of cultural resources, that is not the best option. So are we looking at moving the overhead line as proposed by TEP or moving it elsewhere? Are those the options we're looking at now?
They want to commingle this line, this replacement line with some existing, much bigger transmission poles. But that's easy to say right now. But once all the impacts are identified, you might be left with some overhead poles, branches that come back into that same area. We don't know. We don't know that.
Yeah, we don't, Nathan. But instead of what are there now currently 25 giant transmission poles, as opposed to maybe a few that bring it into the neighborhood area, that'd be better. a few
Well, what
is
if it
better
moves
than.
it away from one neighborhood and into another neighborhood, and then we got to deal with another neighborhood that's
Well,
unsatisfied?
that's conjecture, Nathan. They have an existing corridor 500 feet to the east. I don't quite get why.
Well, we
You know.
don't have an existing corridor for the Silver Bell 46 kV subtransmission and distribution lines. Those are different rights of way, and we would in fact need to bring distribution back into the neighborhood. In addition, then other utilities that are attached would also have to find routes to serve all of the public, all of the home sites, commercial properties along Silver Bell, which would you couldn't do without having to underground or impact. So therefore it's just really not a viable.
Mr. Applicant, it wasn't that decision to bring these large transmission poles into the Silver Bell widening project a decision on your part from the get-go, and at that point you went down that road instead of possibly exploring a shared corridor, if you will?
Well, I think we had that discussion in the context of a shared corridor with other utilities underground, or if we moved, to a shared corridor elsewhere, you still would have ultimately at the end of any design consideration, you would have undergrounding or significant impacts to that archaeology. And so there's really no way to avoid either relocating or considering other alternative routes or co-locating without having those impacts. Whereas this design, as currently prepared, is the minimum variance. It is the minimum design that meets all of the needs for preserving the archaeology, providing power to the public, and helping to facilitate a public transportation improvement project for the Silver Bell corridor. So balancing all of the different priorities and interests, this is the design that was settled on as optimized through we have over 1,500 hours of planning and design into it, and the city and the county and city of Marana and tribes and Army Corps of Engineers have much more than that. So
yes, but you did, but not considering the neighborhood stakeholders. In that list you just gave me, the neighborhood stakeholders were not included.
They have been included. I mean, they have a link on their webpage to the project site, and there's been neighborhood meetings per this process. And so this Silver Bell corridor project has ample public outreach and public involvement. And I mean, I think Rick could probably elaborate on that if you'd like, but there's been adequate information readily available for extended period of time. And the city's also involved and engaged with continued discussion about the transportation scope more specifically.
So to add to that, Ms. Clement, Mr. Chair, going back as the history of the project, so in the initial evolution, Ms. Clement, the items you're talking about in a general level, not at a design level when it comes to the impacts to the utilities, but what do we do recognizing a roadway, utilities, human interaction, how are we going to balance all that? So those discussions would have happened, would have taken place, and a decision would have been identified, a recommendation that narrowing the footprint, minimizing project area, keeping everything within the existing impacted area, or minimizing expansion would have been the preferred way. And that would have been shared through the task force that we had formed for this project, and then the public meetings that would have been explained. Whether that would have been a primary element of concern, because we heard a lot about folks from traffic, pedestrian use, bike use, wildlife. So depending on the nature of the time frame, there may have been other items that were maybe of a greater interest during those courses of those discussions. But all that would have been folded in to kind of land us then and guide us for when Kevin and his team come through now with the more detailed design. So to your point, was it considered? It would have been very early on with a lot of those other stakeholders and people that you're talking about in more general terms. We wouldn't have had those specifics because once we land on a concept, then it would be several years before we'd put actual design details to Kevin's efforts and the relocation of those specific facilities. So there's a gap of time between when those conversations happen in general and then now where they're happening in detail, if that answers your question and that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It makes me realize that the public was not involved at the critical point where they start to understand the look of the project, the visual, physical impact of the project. They were told generalities and it all sounds good, and then the real design pops up in front of them and they are opposed to it.
Well, where was the council member that represents the public here? Was that person involved in some of the design, or are they just completely unaware and uninvolved?
I don't believe they were left unaware. Knowing it spanned 3 jurisdictions, I can tell you at the time, since I worked with the county, we were involved with our Board of Supervisors representative, and there were some questions and some issues that had spilled out of that. But speaking on behalf of the individual jurisdictions with either Marana or the city, I can't speak to what those conversations would have been with the council members or their particular aides or representatives.
Well, this is within the city limits, correct?
Well, the overall Silver Corridor spans all 3 jurisdictions. So the initial design development looked from the grant all the way up to Ina Road to come up with our overall design concept. So that was an effort that involved all 3 jurisdictions, looking at all roughly 7 miles of corridor. And that effort led us to how do we phase it? How do we want to implement? What's the best way to tackle the immediate piece, which was grant to Goree, and then the subsequent pieces and make sure they're going to work together as well as with all the partner stakeholders. So it was a very holistic and cumulative approach.
What city ward is this particular phase in? Does anybody know?
It abuts wards 1 and 3 have Silverbell as a boundary. So both.
If it was in Ward 6, I can tell you Kozaczek would be all over this.
Yeah.
And he would be helping the neighbors. So if we're going to just make some observations about how we don't like the process, I think that presentation by the councilmen and women should have helped these, shape the direction of the way things are going. But that didn't happen. It doesn't look like it anyways.
Right. So what do we do? I mean, so frustrating.
Carol, I think you were onto something, when you were asking for mitigation, asking for the meandering MUP and making sure that is at least shaded. I think mitigation is.
Thank you, Miss Rosemary. Yes, but that's the last ditch effort improvement. With the information I've been hearing today, I am not comfortable with the public process, the stakeholders not being involved in the actual design, nor am I totally convinced that TEP has fully vetted the idea of moving it east. And to be honest, I'm not totally convinced that TEP has totally vetted the idea of undergrounding portions of it. They're 3 foot
which of the 7 items on the screen do you remain unconvinced? And then in your motion that you're starting to put in your mind, you need to say, these are the aspects that we haven't demonstrated.
Okay, let me look.
And while Carol's contemplating her motion, Maria and Rosalind, how many times do we have to see this case?
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Chair, the Board of Adjustment meets in week after this upcoming week. So this would be the last opportunity, but we were just seeking to have an actual recommendation for the record, one way or the other.
Sure.
Oh, gosh. I know.
While Carol is thinking about that, can I make one clarification? I think we just discussed this at length 2 weeks ago, but we talked about the fact that we're actually raising the elevation of the new roadway and the new MUP, and why couldn't the lines be buried without disturbing the existing cultural resources with that elevation increase?
I think to speak to that, if you consider just one component of this effort, we need junction boxes. So an underground utility has to have underground vaults to make connections, and those vaults need to be located approximately every 800 feet, and the 46 kV voltage would need to be separated from a 13.8 voltage per code to have two different vaults, and per safety standards and practices. So you can think about it like this, like you're familiar with by a Chevy Suburban, large SUV. The dimensions of a Chevy Suburban are smaller than a vault. So if you had to dig and bury two Chevy Suburbans along Silver Bell Road every 800 feet, that would be one component of the underground infrastructure required for this project, for that to be a viable engineering design that meets all of code and safety requirements. And then you would have to trench between those vaults and connect those excavations. And that just simply cannot be done, which leads to the ultimate conclusion, when it's been mentioned that this hasn't been considered or that hasn't been considered, any and all considerations ultimately culminate at one final conclusion, and that is that installing an underground utility would cause significant impacts to some very, very rare, unique, and important archaeological sites. We're talking like ancestral heritage resources, burials, funerary objects, it's old sites that are extremely unique by all accounts, even in the realm of archaeology. And I think Ian did a very excellent and outstanding job of presenting that. And that's where it ultimately comes down to, is that this is an infinitely complex project, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the understanding that our intent as TEP is to avoid impacting those archaeological resources. And the tribal support of that, and then the city as well has expressed in no unspecific terms that it will not require undergrounding and can't require undergrounding because it can't be party to the impacts to those resources. So it's really an effort to balance and preserve those ancestral resources and archaeology in balancing that with modern current ordinances. And the basic position is that we want to side with the preservation of archaeological resources and put forth a design that is the minimum overhead design to provide power to the community while minimizing and avoiding impacts to those resources.
Yeah. Well, let me just say this, for this idea of undergrounding in the fill sections. If you took the bottom elevation of the required vaults and you place that on existing grade, your road's going to be like 15 feet in the air or something. Well, not 15, but the road, you would start objecting to the road being too high. And the cars driving, it would be like a raised highway at that point.
Yes, but I believe the vaults are what, 4 or 5 feet high? So if they're put on existing grade, that means 2 foot above grade. Is that possible? And how many vaults would there be every 800 feet as opposed to how many poles? We have 25 or some poles, is that correct? And how many pole boxes, the vaults, would there need to be approximately?
Well, so the vaults have a height of 10 feet. And so you increase grade, and then if you increase grade to that amount, you introduce extreme complexity. So you have existing sewer, you have existing water lines. If you buried those,
but that's being buried
level,
already. That's existing. So that's there's let's assume there's 3 feet of fill above that. You set your vault on existing grade. You have 3 feet of fill. So the vault, can you partially bury vaults? Can there be 3 feet of buried vault with 4 feet above ground?
No, the final grade is at the top of the entrance, and so
and where is
Chairman
the
Kaplan
entrance on the
mentioned,
vault? Is it at the base of the vault or midway or top?
Oh,
it's at the top of the vault, and you would have fill volumes that you would have
You have to bring in 10
elevated
foot of fill. You'd have to bring in
yeah,
all right.
fill.
I don't particularly know if I like me saying this, but I think unfortunately we've exhausted the possibility of burying lines. Would other DRB members agree?
I do agree.
I would agree, unless the vaults can be above ground or partially above ground. If they have to be buried, then yes, I think that's not a viable solution.
You haven't exhausted to reroute elsewhere.
No, I know that. I'm getting there. Mr. Applicant, just point of clarification to Rosemary's question. Can the vaults be partially buried?
No, that you'd have vaults sticking up in the. Yeah, just short answer would be no.
Why? Unsightliness or just not precedented, not done that way?
A little both. Yeah, it is. It's if you had vaults sticking up, I mean that would be in violation of the scenic ordinance for one, and then you would have.
But it would be another variance, perhaps a lesser palatable variance request.
I don't think it would be safe, Carol, to have a vault half sticking up. All of a sudden, it's not going to be, quote, protected. And then if it fails, then you have a significant exposure to safety. Interesting idea. I like the out-of-box thinking, but again, this is not the design checking board, you know.
Right, we're not here to design their project. I know, I keep forgetting that. Okay, so the other option, relocating, taking this giant transmission lines out of the project scope and taking it out of the box and moving it into the existing TEP corridor box project. What
so let's not get any more. I hear you loud and clear on that, Carol. Let's not have a conversation on that. Maybe make a motion and say we want to continue. Come back with impact analysis of relocating the line to the other existing, so that we can actually hear the facts of what the impact are, and you know that's going to give them quite a challenge to figure that out. But that's what's needed.
That's good, Nathan.
To be clear, we don't have an existing right-of-way for the 46 kV line. So we have an existing right-of-way along Silver Bell Road.
Well, it's not
right-of-way for with the other right-of-way for the transmission lines that are located to the east. It's not as simple as just moving a line to that right-of-way. There's no right-of-way dedicated for this.
It may not be the solution. Reconnect. So my sense is it may not be the magical solution that we all hope it could be. So let's have the applicant present the facts and figures on that for consideration, because we need to justify that this is the. It would still require a variance, by the way, because where the suggested relocation is still in the corridor. Okay, but it might be construed.
A tenth of a mile is out of the scenic corridor, and TEP is putting a future transmission line along the corridor 1/10 of a mile to the
Point
east.
of
and
order, this is not a public hearing.
23-24.
Yeah, so let's do a motion and Maria, could you put the motion on?
Actually,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, may I jump in? If you,
Yeah.
one thing is you're considering before your motion, I just wanted to remind you of Ian's, when his presentation was being made at the last meeting, and he mentioned that area of potential effect, the boundary, he described it as a cage that was under the approval and the permitting of the federal government through the Corps of Engineers that put a box around our impacts. They don't extend outside of the project right away. So as you make your motion, just remember that there was that limitation that essentially put a hard cage around our project boundaries.
Wouldn't that be great if we got the Corps of Engineers to give us a 3-hour presentation? I don't want that.
You go for it, Nathan.
But I think what we would
punishment. Gluttons for punishment. Yeah.
One thing that I'm thinking of in a motion is a continuance, and then ask them to bring back some facts, a fact sheet of what the of the pros and cons of relocating it away from the neighborhood. Is that what you're thinking, Carol and Rosemary?
Yes.
Let me ask a question before we go down that road. So do we know anything about the archaeological resources along the proposed potential corridor that's 1/10 of a mile to the east? Do we know if that's within that area that's been studied?
I believe it is, but
I thought
Yeah.
the archaeological study showed that to be part of the area, because it's pretty widespread. So we will assume that it has to be, probably it will be shown that it has to be above ground. But still, it's not this neighborhood getting sandwiched. Oh my goodness. So Nathan, I like where you're going with this.
So we just continue this sucker and ask them to bring back some information on this alternate route that has surfaced.
Well, I don't believe.
Can I ask a procedural question?
Yes, you can, Rosemary.
Okay, so if we continue again and the Board of Adjustments meets before we reconvene, it's not going to matter. Am I correct?
Well, Miss Rosemary, I was very pleased with the Board of Adjustments' response to our last standing on this project. They turned it back to us. It's not like they're gonna not listen to us. That was my first experience with a Board of Adjustment decision, and I was pleased with it. I felt like they were.
Ms. Clements, I'd like to make a point of clarification. The Board of Adjustment did not meet. Their meeting was canceled due to lack of quorum. Staff saw it as an opportunity to suggest to TEP that they reach out and come back so that you all could get the information that you were not able to have at the last meeting, and that would perhaps enable you to be able to reach a decision and make a recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was dumb luck, so to speak. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Wells.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, I also want to remind you of that one stipulation that we found at the last meeting, that the DRB has 21 days to issue a recommendation, and we're way past the 21 days. And the reason is being seen here today is because the Board of Adjustment didn't reach quorum, and so we're back here.
So
again.
if we go for a continuance, we would have to agree to meet before the Board of Adjusters gets together.
I would be happy to do that. This project is important enough to me.
Or the other option, Carol, is we just say that we find it not in compliance and we explain to the Board of Adjustments where we're not satisfied.
Well, I like that. You know, it seems very straightforward instead of us keep digging for information, and as we unearth more information, we get more perplexed and with a more disgruntled I'll speak for myself.
But what is our rationale?
Our
And it's not-
rationale is the property reduction thing, property
It doesn't,
values.
it doesn't meet most of the variance criteria.
But the rationale, I'm not sold on this whole property thing.
Okay, then let's go to asking more information. We'll take our chances. I mean, you know, we do the best we can. I like the relocation idea. My first choice, of course, is burial. That doesn't really seem viable. So the relocation idea is a good one. And mind you, Mr. Appleton.
The relocation idea is in the fantasy honeymoon phase. Just wait until they analyze it, and then you're not going to like all those impacts either. I'm sorry for being a realist there, but that's the way these projects work.
Yes, but it will be very interesting to see how the relocation might impact the Silver Bell roadway widening project. You know, that's going to have.
I'll go ahead and say that the relocation is really not going to be viable consistent with the avoidance of those impacts to the archaeological resources. We would need to bring electric infrastructure back to all of the houses on Silver Bell, and that couldn't be done under this scenario that you're contemplating.
Rosemary, we haven't heard your opinion yet.
I mean, just kind of thinking.
The Silver Bell
that
corridor
road.
moves over into that existing 1/10 of a mile east transmission
Excuse
line,
me.
north Sunset Road.
Excuse me. I don't think we're going to see TEP present relocating the line and all of the service to all of the current businesses and residents being served by that line as a viable option. I don't know that that's a realistic expectation of this. And I think, you know, we do need to be realistic. We do have an opportunity to make recommendations for mitigation. And I guess I would like to see us focus our efforts there.
Do you have a motion in mind?
One question before we talk about that. So with this particular phase, are we setting a precedent that would carry into the next phase?
Well, whether we want to or not, it is a precedent.
I mean, if we were to approve a variance, I would want to see, you know, all of these aspects looked at in detail for the next phase without just blindly granting a variance. I would say, you know, all of these, the cultural resources, the possibility of burial, all these things need to be examined for each phase independently. And I wouldn't want to see a variance granted during this phase carry over to future phases.
Yeah, good point, Rosemary.
Mr. Chair and board member, just as a reminder, the further northern phases, once it gets past Del Cerro, actually transitions into the county and town of Marana ownership roads. So their local governance rules, I think there's a small portion that is still within the city's jurisdiction, but it actually starts encroaching into the other three jurisdictions. So that may or may not come into play in your thinking on that.
But surely other jurisdictions will be looking downstation as to what was previously done.
I would be that would be a huge speculation on my part that I wouldn't feel comfortable on their behalf.
Yeah, and phase 3 is also in the earlier. I mean, there's still a significant amount of design work on phase 3. So I think your input and recommendations about mitigation and requirements as it relates to this phase, you know, can be considered, you know, certainly by TEP in the context of future planning efforts. So.
Well, Curiosity may have killed the cat, but I'm curious to see what a relocation into their other corridor would do. I mean, yeah, it might open another can of worms, but will they be less detrimental is what I'm curious about. I'm leaning towards that route, you guys.
Vote, women, vote.
Nathan, you were going there a bit ago with your motion to bring back information. I know this is tedious and long, and we've spent so much time, but I do feel it's a very important project, not only for the neighbors, but for precedents.
Okay, so the motion is the Design Review Board has reviewed the proposed scenic corridor zone modifications, reductions and deletions, and recommends and requests a continuance. We would like a fact sheet on this relocation option, showing the potential impacts and minimization of impacts that option may afford. We will see the applicant again prior to their appointment with the Board of Adjusters.
Nathan, do you want to say that we understand it will take the large transmission poles out of the project area into an existing TEP corridor? I think somehow it would be good for the Board of Adjustment people to understand that that's 500 feet to the east.
So I'll modify it to say, we understand this option that we're requesting further information and exploration on would relocate the objectionable poles.
Would it relocate them out of the view corridor?
Well, I have not seen, I don't even know. Problem is, I don't even know what this third option looks like.
Exactly. I'm guessing that it gets the sandwich effect gone, which is important. But yeah, that's a good point. We don't know what it looks like. TEP doesn't know what it looks like. The neighbors don't know what it looks like.
Yeah. So that we have an existing entitlement right of way along Silverbell that predates the scenic ordinance, and the relocation again is being requested of TEP, where for us to relocate outside of an existing right of way would require an entirely new suite of land acquisition, right-of-way acquisition, easements. And so that the land acquisition component of that is substantial. And then the service is, again, bringing service back to the businesses and residences along Silverbell Road and then that region of the area is just, that couldn't be done without avoiding impacts as we've discussed as they relate to the Silverbell Road. It's not a viable option.
Why don't we just, let me talk to the DRB here for a minute.
Yes.
Luckily, we're not approving or disapproving a variance, making a recommendation. So the pressure is somewhat off. One day when we get promoted to the Board of Adjusters, then we'll be in the hot seat. Right now, we're making a recommendation. Let's not ask for more information. Let's just tell the board how we truly feel. And it sounds like, Carol, you truly feel that they should not recommend it.
Correct.
Rosemary, how do you truly feel? Do you think they should, you think that they should recommend it or they should not recommend it?
I feel like there's not a good answer to that question. I feel like there are variables in both directions. You know, you're either you're either impacting cultural resources or you're impacting view corridors and potentially property values for neighbors. And there's not a way to make everyone happy. It's just not, it's not possible. I mean, in an ideal world, yes, the line would be buried and nothing would be impacted. But we don't have that option. So I feel like the way that as the DRB, we can make the greatest impact to this is to mitigate.
So approve with mitigation would be your strongest vote. And that's where we were,
the most realistic option.
And that's where we were heading 2 weeks ago, was approve with mitigation, and it failed.
Right.
So the one mitigation item that we heard was the multi-use path should have 50% shade. That would be a challenge, but it would be certainly a nice amenity to that path. What other mitigations can you see, either Rosemary or Carol?
Well, just along that, I mean, I think that would help add value back to those neighborhoods. You know, if you had a multi-use path that was shaded, it's a nice amenity, and it's something that would make people want to live nearby.
How about a drinking fountain and some fitness equipment, like Parks and Rec style fitness equipment?
Ooh, what about a call to artists? Maybe they could deal with those 3-foot diameter poles in fun ways. Call to artists, 1% of construction budget. There we go.
We can recommend that to the Board of Adjusters. Why not?
These are the things that we have. Yeah, I think this is the road I'd like to see us go down, and you know, what can we give back to the public and to the neighborhood without completely throwing this project out of whack for another year of fact finding.
So we would find them in compliance with the criteria subject to the following conditions: the multi-use path to have 50% shade, to be designed with 50% shade.
On June 21st, you have to do the date thing, or else that doesn't mean anything. At whatever our wording is, June 25th at 2 o'clock or noon, whatever the time is, right?
Oh, right, at the summer solstice, yep.
Right.
Okay, so that's one condition, the multi-use path, 50% shade at solar noon on June 21st. We would like to see drinking fountains,
including little dog fountains at the base,
and workout equipment.
I don't know about it, workout equipment, Nathan. I've done that with projects, and it just gets old and disrepaired, and people don't really use it. I would rather see the money go to a call to artists of 1% of the construction budget.
That might already be in place, but
I don't think it is, Mr. Applicant, is it?
There is an art component to the Silver Bell corridor design, and the percent of budget, I don't know that answer, but there is an art component. So I know there has been interest in the past, and that may be something that the transportation project could consider.
Okay, so a portion of the project, and then I'll say, for example, 1%, which is going to be a huge number.
Yeah, that's typical on roadway projects.
Yep, get set aside to public art to improve the corridor.
Can we specify that the areas that are of greatest impact, for example, the neighborhood that's being sandwiched there, receives a public art feature nearby?
Rosemary, perhaps we could specify that the art development and the selected artists work in close conjunction with the Tucson Mountain Association people, Miss Denise. You can just shake your head, yes, you don't have to talk.
Neighborhoods shall work with the artists to strategically place
Yeah, there you go.
the art. I got it. I wrote it down. All right, I'm going to make a motion.
Oh, God.
The Design Review Board has reviewed the proposed scenic corridor zone modifications, reductions, and deletions, and recommends to the Board of Adjustment approval. Finding the project in compliance with the criteria established in UD Section 310-3K, subject to the following conditions. The multi-use path will be improved to have 50% shade as measured on solar noon on June 21st. 2, a portion of the project budget, 1%, shall be set aside for public art to improve the corridor. 3, neighborhoods shall work in conjunction with the artist to strategically place that art.
What about your fountains?
Okay. 4, drinking fountain stations for people and dogs will be placed along the multi-use path. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Great. We've had enough discussion. I'll call for a vote. Your vote is either approve, deny, or recently discovered option of abstain.
Maria,
hold
on, Nathan.
Yes.
Do we need 2? We have a quorum of 3, 2 to approve, and 1 can deny, or do we need all 3 to approve to pass this motion?
Ms. Clemens, you need 2 people to pass the motion.
All right. We have to all vote at the same time.
I know.
On the count of 3, all those in favor of this motion and the conditions, say aye or raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We got 3. We passed it with 3.
I wanted to deny, but it's not going to happen. I can tell.
Cheryl, the truth is, if we don't do this and we reject it and it goes to the Board of Adjustments, we might not get our improvements.
Anything. I understand it. It's like a hard place in a rock.
Very practical suggestion on your part, Rosemary. All right. We're now on item number 7, staff announcements. Is informational, and Maria, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the DRB, no announcements. Just that the next DRB meeting is scheduled for in 2 weeks for November 19.
Okay.
I have a question for Maria, if I could. The Tucson well sites, Maria, it seems like they just sort of stopped. I mean, that one site that I was viewing for completion of landscape improvements, that stopped, and then they gave me another site in which the neighbors put in the landscaping. I was hoping to get sites that we have reviewed that have been completely completed by the Tucson Water.
Yeah, it seems like Tucson Water, Ms. Clement, it's still, working through the,
whatever.
The whatever, all the things that need to get done to finally complete the projects. It seems like they're moving forward to completion, but it's just taking a while.
Okay, I just wanted you to know I eyes on it. I haven't forgotten,
Yes,
given up.
and I appreciate it. So if you can help me keep track also,
Okay.
so we can tap on their shoulders again. But it seems like they're being very responsive to our requests, and they're keeping us up to date.
Do we have a running list? Where would I find a running list for projects, Tucson water well projects that have come through? Even in my time of being on the DRB, we've reviewed several of them. Where would I find a list of those that I can sort of keep tabs on?
Let me try to find that for you.
Okay, because we've reviewed 4 or 5 of them, I think, over the past year or so.
Yeah, that's correct. I will need to put that list together for you.
Thank you, Maria. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments from staff or DRB before we adjourn?
I just want to say I appreciate everyone's input on this case. I know, TEP and the county and the city and, a lot of people did a lot of work to bring information. And I also really appreciate the neighbors coming and speaking, and I appreciate your passion. And I want you to know that we have heard your comments, and, we do take them into consideration. And I want you to know that it's not an easy solution on our part, that we don't always get to pick the ideal solution that we wish could happen, but we're trying to do the best we can in order to mitigate the situation. So thank you for your input.
Yeah, I'd like to second that and say thank you to the board for all your time. I know this has been a lengthy, with 3 meetings, lengthy considerations, and complex project. And I also want to echo that we definitely respect and appreciate your input. And I can say very candidly that there is a lot of consideration of the points that you bring forward. I see emails and in meetings that there's consideration and contemplation and engineering, and it gets back down to those engineers and designers, and your input is taken into consideration in the context of design. So I appreciate your involvement. It definitely adds to the value of the project, and thank you for your time.
Okay. All right. Well said, everyone. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.